Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Deconstructing Leftists. Now, today on this program, I'm sitting in a tractor trailer truck, and the lighting is so bad that you really wouldn't be able to see anything if I was using the camera. So I just decided to do it the easiest way with just audio. And really, that's probably just as well because I'm one of those types that really, they say, has a face for radio. Nothing really to see here. And actually, I've spent a lot of years as a radio announcer before I got into truck driving, and I still do radio to this day through internet radio. It's just something I've always loved doing. Matter of fact, my first job was working in radio when I was just 15 years old. I started in radio. But anyway, today I'm just going to be doing the program with the cover picture. And on today's show, this is not something I had planned. I was actually going to do a program talking about Jesus's prophecies about himself. There's actually two of them that a lot of critics and atheists have been saying that Jesus didn't fulfill those prophecies. And I was going to go ahead and tackle that today, but somebody wrote me a message in the comments on one of the videos that was on one of the YouTube channels. The name was Donovan Bryan 5000. And I want to thank him for taking the time to write me with these questions. I don't think that he was really writing me so much because he really thought that I had answers for him. I think he was writing me because he probably went over to one of those atheist think tanks, or stink tanks as I call them, where they have just oodles of things they claim that, you take this argument over to your average Joe, amateur uh, apologist, and you bring this to him and you'll stump him with it. I think that's what he was doing, but nevertheless, he did ask me some questions, and I read them, and I thought, this is worthy of doing a video on, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. They're really not entirely new to me. I've seen some of these. The first two that I really want to tackle are ones that I've seen them really become, prevalent in the last few months. Uh, First of all, I saw people questioning whether or not Moses was a real historical figure. They were claiming there was no evidence for Moses. Then the next thing you know, everybody's saying Moses wasn't real. But they got even bolder after that one. Then they started saying the same thing about Jesus. There's no historic evidence that Jesus was a real figure. And, I thought this was absolutely ridiculous. But nevertheless, it started circulating. And of course, like everything else, one person gets a hold of it, then they start spreading it. And it's become you've gone from no evidence to these people didn't exist. So let me go ahead and tackle these. I had answers already to these questions, and I gave him a quick answer in the comments about Jesus and Moses. However, I got to thinking about it, and I was like, who are these people telling me there's no evidence? Why should I even believe them when they say that? Because they've been making all kind of claims as long as I remember and passing them on like facts, and we just accept that stuff. And I almost got tricked on that one a little bit, just accepting it because somebody told me there was no evidence. Well, I decided that rather than just accept that, I'd go ahead before I even did my video and I was going to just give the answers that I already knew. I went to Chat GPT and I decided to ask about this because I was like, where did this idea come from? And it gave me a lot of really good information to add to the program. So hopefully it'll be interesting to you. I'm not going to tell you, read everything that I got from Chat GPT on it. I'm just going to give you highlights of it to tell you what they said about this idea that Jesus and Moses were not historical figures. And I'll start with Jesus. The the big thing they keep coming up with is they said that the Romans did not have records of Jesus Christ, his existence, miracles he did, the crucifixion. Well, first of all, the miracles he did. Why in the world would the Roman government concern themselves with Jesus doing miracles any more than the United States government has any reason to keep real strong records about every faith healing preacher that's out there, like Oral Roberts or R.W. Shambach or Kenneth Hagin or any of them? I mean, why would they do that? So, I mean, I just kind of wrote that part off, and he wasn't even Roman. So that didn't make any sense to me anyway. But then you could ask about the crucifixion. You know, they have no records of the crucifixion. And so anyway, they said there's no records of anything there. So anyway, I'm going to jump right down to point number 4 that I jotted down about the records of crucifixions. This is what ChatGPT said. It said Romans rarely recorded executions of non-Roman citizens. We lack Roman records for many historical figures that we know existed. So the idea that there are no records doesn't really mean anything. I already knew it didn't mean anything, but nevertheless, it was nice to get confirmation from ChatGPT. Now they're talking about actual records from the Roman government. There wouldn't have been things like you're not going to find birth certificates. You're not going to find things like portraits or court transcripts and all that kind of stuff. What they're asking for is absolutely absurd. It does not prove that Jesus didn't exist. And of course, again, not a Roman citizen. But anyway, that part we already got. Now, I got to thinking about it, and I was thinking, maybe we don't have records from the Roman government, but we sure do have plenty of records out there. There's plenty of writings about Jesus everywhere as a historical figure. And I even thought within my own self, maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Have they checked the Vatican archives? I'll bet you that there's all kind of things there. But they were insisting they were looking for official Roman documents. Well, you don't have to have Roman documents to prove that Jesus existed as a historical figure. According to ChatGPT, even if a person doesn't have all of this kind of documentation, like say from the Roman government, that historians do not generally expect that they're going to have that kind of information in the first place. It's something they just started demanding about Jesus and Moses. But it's very common that the only thing they will have to be able to show somebody existed are mentions that were written decades later, references by hostile or neutral writers, and there may be little or no archaeological records. Yet, it's accepted as a historical fact that people that are in that category still existed as historical figures, and Jesus would fit right into that. So they're actually trying to raise it to a higher standard than they would with anyone else. So anyway, I was asking the ChatGPT, where did all this stuff come from? And it says that the skepticism began in the 18th and 19th century during a time of enlightenment, they called it. They were promoting stories about pagan gods, solar mythology, and an allegorical reading of Scripture. This is the same junk I'm seeing the atheists promoting today. All the same thing. But it also went on and it said they were never considered mainstream. It also goes on to say that there's been a revival of this same kind of skepticism among modern authors without formal training in ancient history, and it started spreading in the late 20th century and into the 21st century up to today. Many of the people spreading it are anti-religious. It's being spread on YouTube, which is where I've seen it, on blogs and social media. Richard Carrier, I've never heard of him, but I imagine all of these atheists probably have, but I haven't, is cited, but only represents a tiny minority view. There is no field of ancient history where Jesus' existence is considered doubtful in the mainstream. This includes secular historians, Jewish scholars, atheist scholars, and Christian scholars. So, again, it's just one of those things that's kind of like a fringe thing that's out there. There are non-Christian references of the existence of Jesus. I don't necessarily have this pronounced right, but somebody, Tacitus, a Roman historian, Josephus, a Jewish historian, Pliny the Younger, Lucian of Samosata. Again, my pronunciation, I'm sure, is horrendous, but I also am very bad in scribbling things down on my notes, so I can't even read my own writings very good. But nevertheless, the main important thing here is that all of these people confirmed that Jesus existed. And so the next thing it said was, it asked the question, why does this continue? Why are people doing this? And according to ChatGPT, it said it feels powerful to claim that someone's religion is based on nothing. It appeals to people who equate skepticism with intelligence, and it's easy to spread in short form media. It survives, this is what ChatGPT said, it survives for social and psychological reasons, not evidentiary ones. So it was no more impressed with these claims than I was impressed by it. But it was not mainstream people. It's just something that's being spread. And I've noticed this about most of the stuff that the atheists are spreading. It cannot be backed up. It's just stuff they just say. And one of them will say it. And it's kind of like with gossip. One person gets a hold of a story and they just start repeating it. And before you know it, it's spread all over the place. And people don't want to believe any different. They're already skeptics, and they're looking for something else to, another dart to throw at the board and see if it sticks. So that's what's going on with that. Now, with Moses, it said that there was not as much to go by because you're going back further in time to, it said the Bronze Age. It was going way back beyond Jesus, and there wasn't much information really about any individual during that time. They didn't have like individual names. They had less to go by. They had more information like about movement of people and stuff like that, possibly artifacts that were left here and there and things like that, but they didn't have that much to go on. So the fact they didn't have all of these records of Moses really doesn't mean a whole lot. And they backed up, ChatGPT backed up what I had said when I was writing back in the comments section, that Egypt would not want to have an embarrassing thing like what happened with Moses in their official records. And this is what ChatGPT said, and I didn't even ask it directly about it. But it said, Egypt exaggerated victories, omitted failures, and never recorded slave rebellions as triumphs. So clearly they were not going to give mention in their writings about Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. They would have stricken it from the record. So that was what I said. Now, as far as lack of anything there that, as far as physical evidence, it said that part of the reason for this was that that nomadic people had gone around with temporary camps. They had hearths, pottery, and temporary shelters, which would erode quickly with time, especially in a desert climate. So it's not surprising that they didn't have archaeological evidence for the journey. Now, here's something that I learned that I didn't know, and I'm glad I looked this up. While they didn't have Egyptian records, because obviously they would have expunged them from the records, they wouldn't have kept records of this, and they didn't have proof of the exodus from Egypt, it does say they do have evidence that hundreds of small settlements appeared rapidly in the land of Canaan. Populations began to exist from almost nothing. Villages that lacked luxury goods, and something else that it said was interesting, these villages had no pig bones, which was distinct from the people that lived in the land of Canaan at the time. It said that it was known that these people were not Egyptian, but had memories of living in Egypt and knew things about Egypt that they shouldn't have known if they didn't live there. It also said that the people had constantly talked about an escape from Egypt. The name Moses and Aaron, here's something I didn't realize either, are considered Egyptian names. So a lot of things here, there actually is evidence for Moses. I honestly didn't know that all this stuff was they had this evidence, but they did. So, again, this is not as big of a deal as a lot of people were saying. Even when I first heard it, I thought, lack of evidence, that's supposed to prove they don't exist. But it is something they're peddling all over the place. And again, all they do is they go to these atheist websites. They see the latest stuff that they put in there, and they just spread it like it's a fact. Just like, that's what I've been saying about the science. People will just come up with a new one. They'll say, well, we know for a fact Noah's Ark couldn't have happened because of this and this and this and this. And as soon as one person comes up with that, they start spreading it all over the place. But they don't even take into account that God works supernaturally. It's throughout the Bible. It's not something I'm making up. If he can rain down manna from heaven, bring all that quail to eat for the children of Israel, can allow a meal pot never to run out of meal during a famine, feed 5,000 men plus women and children with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, turn water into wine, all these types of things that Jesus did. And we're supposed to believe that Noah's Ark couldn't have happened because of our modern beliefs of science and stuff. Doesn't work. But again, it was a thing that they were spreading all over the place, not giving it any serious thought. Now, I'm going to tackle the easier of these two questions before I get to it's not really a hard question, but I'm going to spend a little more time on the other one. But one of the questions that was asked me about Jesus being born of a virgin or not born of a virgin. And they were talking about the genealogies and how that in the genealogies, there's 2 different ones, and they do seemingly contradict. They're not saying the exact same thing, but they were put in there for different reasons. In Matthew's gospel, he's trying to show that Jesus is a rightful heir to the throne. That's what he's trying to show with that genealogy. Over in Luke's genealogy, he's trying to show Jesus as like Son of Man all the way back to Adam and Eve. Neither of these were intended to put them under a microscope and look for any discrepancies. They weren't written for that purpose. They had a divine purpose, but it wasn't for that. So I wouldn't expect them to be 100% every detail consistent, every single person and all that. And I want to give you some information, just some of my own personal studies, probably from, my goodness, I bet it was 35, 40 years ago when I did this study. I went back through the genealogies. I remember doing it. And I went back and I traced all the names as much as I could back through the Old Testament as much as was possible. Of course, you were going to find a few places where you couldn't find everything because there were gaps, but I tried to trace them as best I could. And I noticed that in certain cases, certain names were left out of the genealogies. And I want to point out this about Matthew chapter 1, verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. In coming up with that, again, there were certain names left out. And when I say left out, what I mean is it might say like, Peter, the son of Robert. But Robert might have been his grandfather. You see what I'm saying? It's like the name was left out. The genealogies were not written to be absolutely precise. That's not an error in the Bible. They just weren't written for that purpose. And if a name was left out or something was seemingly not the way we think it should be, there was a reason for it. And that's why there's a scripture that actually says not to argue over endless genealogies that stir strife and contentions. Don't do that. And I imagine that's part of the reason. And of course, I also gotten into in my previous video talking about who was the son of Joseph and getting into the thinking on that and the two different accounts. But that really isn't nearly as big a deal as he was making out. And was he born of a virgin? Absolutely he was. He had to be born of a virgin. Now, the genealogies were not saying that he wasn't born of a virgin. They were talking about his adopted father, Joseph. They were not talking about his natural father. They were showing it through him. And but everybody knows Jesus' real father was God. Why is that? That's because of original sin. Jesus, in order for his sacrifice to be counted, had to be a perfect, sinless sacrifice. If he was born with original sin like the rest of us are because of Adam's sin, then he would have had fault and would have had to have died for himself, and then he wouldn't have been a perfect sacrifice. It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have done any good. So he had to be born of a virgin. Now, there's something else that kind of crossed my mind about the virgin birth. Now, I've always just taken it, well, that the sin comes through the seed, which would have been the father, not the mother. However, it is possible, because I got to thinking about this. She was a virgin. We're assuming that the Spirit fertilized her egg, and God was still the father, but she was the woman who carried him. But we're assuming that she was the mother. But it is actually possible that the egg was already, the entire egg was completely, the sperm and the egg were already together, joined together, and a fertilized egg could have been implanted. It didn't have to even be her egg for all we know. But however it was that God would accept it, that Jesus was perfect, sinless, did not have original sin. That's the reason for the virgin birth, and it absolutely is the case. But as far as the genealogies go, the people that are reading, they're putting it under a microscope and saying they're different. They are different. They were written for different purposes, but they weren't written so that every single name was identical. That wasn't the purpose of them. It's not a mistake. It just was. That wasn't the purpose. Now, the last thing I want to deal with is from Genesis. And this is something that I figured out a long time ago. I've read the Bible through, I've mentioned this before, well over 20 times. I just got through going through it this year. Just finished up in Revelation this week in one of those going through the Bible straight through things in the back of my Bible. I'd actually got ahead of it, finished up just a little bit early, but I noticed this a long time ago in Genesis, and I already had pretty much had it figured out just from reading, rereading, studying, and so forth. But the question was about the order of things, and specifically, one of the things was water. So let's look at that. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1 and the first couple of verses. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, I'm giving you my opinion. Some people differ on this, but this is my opinion. I do believe in what some people call a gap theory. I believe that the earth could be very, very old, very ancient. Could be as old as people claim it is that believe in evolution. It could be that old. Verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I don't know when that happened. Yeah, I don't necessarily assume it was 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. And the thinking here is, and I'll give you my thinking on it and why I believe in the gap theory. Well, I think it's probable. The dinosaurs and the Ice Age. You know, we learned about that back when I was in school. And while I'm very skeptical about science, we do have quite a bit of evidence that dinosaurs were real and some of these different kind of creatures that look like they came from another time, a land of the lost or whatever. Some people claim it's a hoax. Could be a hoax, I don't know. But I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. And I remember being taught about this Ice Age and how that even food that the dinosaurs were eating were still in their mouth, like they were in the middle of eating when they froze solid. And you think, well, how in the heck could that have happened? And, the idea they came up with, the scientists did, that this meteor hit the earth and it caused this dust all over the place to the point where the sun was blocked and everything froze. Well, I would assume that would happen it could happen pretty fast, that it would get real cold like that. But at the same time, when it freezing while they were eating, right in the middle of eating something and they froze solid like that, it sounds more like a judgment of God. It sounds like the type of thing that God would do based on our Bible, that there was some kind of something that he had created. And I believe God could have created numerous things over long periods of time before our heaven and earth, the way we know it in Genesis. Genesis is a history from where it begins with us, not necessarily the beginning for God. I often look at the earth and the sea and all that stuff as like God's canvas where he creates. And I think he's probably created numerous different things and then started all over again. And I'll give you another reason for that in a minute. But it fits. It fits everything. It fits the way God does things. He just gets to a certain point and he gets like, I don't want this like this anymore. And he wipes it out. We know he's destroyed almost everybody with a flood. We know that in the Revelation, it's going to get to a point where he's going to destroy everything by fire and he's going to start all over again with a new heaven and a new earth. Well, it fits the pattern. And that God didn't feel the need to inform us about everything that existed before here, because this is about for us. It's for our knowledge about our existence, not existence of a land of the lost type thing. And who knows what kind of upright creatures or whatever else could have existed during some of these times. So that's my feeling about that. Water's existing. Well, if you had an ice age, you would have had something that could freeze. I imagine there was water. I suspect there was. I believe there was water existed. So that's not surprising at all. The earth was without form and void. That would have been the condition after a judgment. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. So at that time, earth was without form and void, and it was dark. And then it says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning was the first day. Now, here's where the controversy comes in. Day one, he creates light. There was darkness already, but now there's light. And they're saying, well, this was before the creation of the sun, moon, and stars, which is what we look at that gives us light. And they're saying that, and they're just reasoning, and they're saying, how could you have light when the sun, moon, and stars hadn't been created? It's a separate creation. That's how. He could create light without a sun. The purpose of the sun, moon, and stars wasn't to create light. It was to regulate things. The light already existed and the darkness already existed, but he created the sun, moon, and stars to regulate light. And we see that over here in Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day. Of course, that's the sun. The lesser light to rule the night, the moon. And he made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. It was about regulating light and darkness. It was not the beginning of it. It was just to regulate it. And so that's the answer to that one. It's something that I spent time on and figured out, a long time ago, because I do I'm a curious person, and I like to get in there and try to discover new things every time I read through the Bible. And I remember going through that, and that's how I figured that out. I spent time on it. And as a matter of fact, I'll even give you another thought about the waters, waters above the firmament and below. There had never rained on the earth until Noah's flood. God knew what was going to happen in the future. And, he very well could have just, all that water above the firmament, just let it loose. And it all comes raining down on the earth and even coming up from, below the earth even. There's no telling the way that God did that. I don't know what it was like at the time of the flood, but I imagine it was one heck of a flash flood across the entire earth when it happened. But there's a lot of things that if you would just take the time to actually study it out and look for answers instead of looking to be a critic. The problem with the people is they're starting out. I know they look at me and say, well, you're starting out with belief. And so in your mind, you're going to find a way to reconcile it and make it all work. And maybe there's some truth to that. I've always believed in God. I'm not somebody who just follows the pack. I've done a lot of research on my own. And I've done things that people even told me I shouldn't have done. Some of the stuff I've done, would be considered deconstruction, but I wasn't really doing it from the standpoint of trying to deconstruct from God. I was just looking at the possibility of, I've studied different religions, different types of denominations and things like that. So this led me to go in and examine the Catholic Church and read the Book of Mormon and stuff like that. I've spent a lot of time researching a lot, reading apocryphal books of the early church, doing a lot of personal study. And I was told not to do that by church people. This stuff's dangerous. So I've done a lot of that stuff on my own out of curiosity. But I admit, I always believed in God. I just can't believe that everything could exist without God. It's not the least bit logical to me. But I have done a lot of personal study, and there are answers to all these things that the atheists say we can't answer. But you got to dig for it, and you got to really look and take the time going into your Bible to figure it out. And every time I go through it, it seems like I'll discover something that I didn't see the first time. And, I know one atheist I was talking to, he didn't think it was necessary to read straight through. It is. If you really want to see how the Bible all fits together and works together, read it straight through, Genesis to Revelation. I realize it's a compilation of 66 different books. I get all of that. I understand all that stuff. I've read it. But if you read it straight through, you'll see how it all fits together in an orderly fashion, and it takes you from the very beginning to the very ending. And whereas if you just jump around, you don't understand it, you're not going to get the full meaning. And one thing I'm going to tell you, if you seriously are trying to understand if the Bible's real or figure it out, the last thing you're going to do is go to some atheist website where they claim they've disproven the Bible and look for their arguments, because all they're doing is just coming up with every far-fetched idea they can come up with, throwing that dart at the board, seeing what'll stick. And then you go over there, a lot of you have never read the Bible, you go over there, you see this stuff, you just are satisfied in your mind that they've already disproven the Bible, and here's all these ways they've done it, and you start coming back and you start telling us that the Bible can't be real because of, X, Y, and Z. And a lot of people you may fool with that, but it's going to be a lot harder for somebody who's studied the Bible all their life. They're not going to be fooled quite as easily. And while most of my education is self-taught, personal study, and things like that, I have had some Bible education. I was a pastor of a denominational church a long time ago, and I had to go through their school. But I'm not somebody who just believes everything that they tell me. I didn't fully agree with everything that they believed. I've never seen a denomination that I did. I probably relate somewhere closer to Wesley than anyone else, with maybe a little bit of mix of some Calvinism in there too. But I'm not pure a believer on any of them. I just believe the Bible. And if I see that they're not going 100% with the Bible, I just go with what the Bible says. That's why I really don't fit in a whole lot with your mainstream Christian churches. But at the same time, I am a Bible believing Christian, and I would fit into the evangelical realm of Christianity because I'm a Bible believing Christian who takes it literally and does believe everything from the Genesis account of creation, Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, the virgin birth. I do believe all of that. I believe it all. And if something contradicts the Bible, I'm going to reject it. But like something like when I was talking about a gap theory, I believe it actually fits with the Bible. I'm not going to tell you in stone it's for a fact, but it fits. And so that's what, based on my opinions and studies, that's what I believe. But, take it or leave it. I know a lot of good people that don't believe in a gap theory, and that's perfectly fine. And they may have their own answers to these questions that I got today. But those are my answers to it. And also, again, a shout out to ChatGPT for giving me more information than I already had. I mean, it told me things that really would even, again, strengthen my faith. Something that I've mentioned before, some of the atheist arguments have strengthened my faith. And I gave one example that was a big one. I've been watching these videos for the last about 3 years, all these deconstruction videos, stuff like that. And they're supposed to actually tear down your faith. They built up my faith because every time I looked into a claim they made, I found that their claim was unfounded. They didn't have the goods that they claimed they did. And one of the big ones was when they kept saying that God looks more like something man would create than man being created by God. And I realized that's ridiculous. It's exactly the opposite. No man would have created the God of the Bible because we don't think like he does. But we might have created all these other gods out there because these gods and goddesses, because they are like man would do. But the God of the Bible, absolutely not. There's no way we would have created that complicated Levitical priesthood. There's no way we would have put a lot of the junk on ourselves that we're forced to do. There's a lot of things that we wouldn't have done that God did. And I've even said eternal punishment for somebody for simply not believing. That's not the way men and women think. We don't think like that. We wouldn't have created a God like that. So no, that actually had a reverse effect. I believe stronger than ever as a result of that. I already believed, but I mean, that just showed me all the more. One of their own arguments backfired, went the other way. Well, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close out with that. And hopefully next time when I do a video, I'll do one with actual video rather than just the picture. But like I say, I'm just an average truck driver with a face for radio, so maybe you actually appreciate the picture better. But either way, I appreciate you joining me today. Hope you got something out of the program. And if you are not a subscriber to my channel, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. And I'll keep on trying to answer any atheist questions that they may have. And also, I'll be doing some programs dealing with politics. Basically, again, as the title says, deconstructing leftists. And most of the atheists that are out here, it really is about politics. If you really look at it, most of them it's about politics. So that's why I throw them all in the same mix. But again, Lord willing, I'll be back soon with another deconstructing leftist video. Take care.